has probably been my most difficult eval this cycle. I started out really not liking him, and then I've gotten higher, and then a little lower. In a cycle where I feel pretty good about a lot of my evals, Brice is fascinating and mildly confusing to me. We're gonna get into his game and the kind of on-ball offensive scoring he brings. This was partly inspired by bucket problem Cam Thomas's explosion recently, but like Brice is obviously so far like a special bucket getter in terms of efficiency and volume. For a freshman or for anyone really in college basketball, he is a gifted tough shot maker. He is proficient, dribbling to his left and pulling up from that elbow. He hits all manner of difficult fadeaways and turnarounds and pull-ups from that 10 to 15 feet area where he's just impossible to stop. And he really has no regard for contests, even a little bit. I want to really zone in on the contest here. As there's a good chance that Brice literally cannot see the rim here. That hand is right in his face. There is a decent chance that his line of sight is very obscured, and yet he sinks this like it's absolutely nothing, because Brice sensabaugh is an absolutely disgusting tough shot maker. He is so deadly at that left elbow and is really, really kind of persistent in hunting that left elbow jumper. Obviously, it makes sense for a righty shooter being comfortable going left since his natural alignment is there. But Brice gets cut off here. I mean, that's a problem for him for sure, but he has the sense to spin back and get to that little left elbow. Despite, the traffic there, he's able to easily finish there. So the tough shot making is really, really special. The shooting overall, this so far has been very special, efficiency wise. Brice is a pretty high volume 3-point shooter, as is. I do wish he took more threes, even. He can be a little passive sometimes, when he has a chance to spot up and take a three, especially given how good he is at shooting over contests. I wish he would pull this kind of, even though he dribbles into another, left elbow pull up that's wide open and cashes. But I do wish he took more threes. Brice's handle is not dynamic, as we're going to get into more later. But what his handle is really optimized for is setting up his jumpers. He loves this little right to left kind of hezzy cross. That's his go-to move from 2 and from 3. This is a little bit of a short clip. We'll slow it down here again. Brice is very comfortable from NBA range, on and off the ball. He loves his little setup right, freeze, and then quick snatch to the left. I'm going to play the other one back again, because I think this is a better example that we can break down. Just kind of sizing up his defender. He plants his right foot hard to kind of, give the illusion that this might be a drive to the right, and then the low cross left for the pull-up. And Brice doesn't need much space at all to get his shot off and to splash it, but the fact that he has, any space at all is really impressive. And as we've kind of been talking about, Brice can shoot a little bit. He's not a crazy off-movement shooter, and most of his threes are off-ball and pretty open. He's definitely more of just an uncontested catch and shoot guy. But the numbers for Brice are really special. 80 from the line, 52% on twos, 50% on long twos, 47% from three. It's really wild. As I mentioned before, almost 90% of his threes assisted. He's not a huge on-ball 3-point threat, but the 15% assisted on the other twos is crazy, and he is in rarefied air in terms of just sheer shooting proficiency. These are the players in Bartorvik database who have come close to Brice's efficiency and volume from mid and from three, and there are not many. And some of them, like Hauser and Marcus Howard, are legendary college shooters, and Hauser's probably going to be a pretty solid NBA player. But I don't put a ton of weight into the percentages, especially for a freshman, just because threes are notably fickle and take a long time to stabilize. So this 46.6% is not a number that I value a lot. Same with the far twos, which are a little more stable generally, but also this is just a ridiculous clip and could definitely normalize over the next couple years. But it stands that Brice is an insane shot maker. But then the question is, how much more is there with him on offense? Because Brice is not a good defender. We're not really talking about in this video, but it's not good. He's like apathetic, and the awareness is not great. The movement's not great. It's not great. But how much else can he bring outside of shot making is the real question. As a guy who really does not like to pass very much, we'll get into that more later. I think plays like this are the key to unlocking his real scoring potential, is using his physical and handling tools to get downhill, as he has like a decent amount of burst for a guy of his shot making caliber. And because of the way he loves to set up his handle with these little hesitations, watch how he just peeks up at the rim, like glances up at the rim, which makes this defender worried, and then he can use this little left to right cross this time to set up and get to the rim. His handle is very simple, but it can work. I love Brice using these long steps. He ends up not making this here, but again, the little hang dribble. This time he just goes straight. He's pretty flexible. Like, this isn't incredible leverage generation, but he can get his hips and his torso pretty low. And I love these long steps to like kind of discard, decelerate, counter this defender's momentum, and he whiffs a bunny that he normally makes. But the process there is great. And when he's able to get these little in and out moves grooving, like, he can really work by guys. I think an area of kind of like low-hanging fruit development for Brice is using his strength more, because he is a really well-built, strong player that does not use his strength very often and doesn't get the most out of it. Again, Brice buckles his defender with the in and out. He gets really low on this one. This is beautiful. And then he's able to just shrug this defender off and finish easy. He loves this hop off of two, since he's not the most vertically explosive guy in the world, as we'll get to. He loves this like hop off of two to get as much explosion and kind of stability as he can. That's where a bunch of his great finishes come from. But there are flashes of him being able to bully defenders to the rim with his strength, and there are areas where I wish he would convert the advantages he does generate into more strength-based kind of creation, where Brice obviously nails like the going left mid-range hash mark jumper because he's a crazy shot maker, but Brice is able to round his defender and kind of gain an advantage here. This is a problem that's not unique to him, that like most young ball handlers have, where they pick up their dribble way too early. But if he takes like one more dribble, lowers his shoulder, he's probably drawing a foul or getting a layup here. But Brice settles for this very difficult fadeaway jumper, which, I mean, right now it makes sense because he's making at a ridiculous clip. But at some point, I think it's important to diversify scoring. And being able to use and unlock that strength is going to be key for Brice developing into like a real like volume scoring threat in the NBA, which I think is certainly possible, and some good low hanging fruit for his development, because it seems like there is just some stuff to be unlocked with coaching and mentality shifting because of his strength. I think the main concern with the finishing, as we kind of saw, the finishing numbers are like the only real hole in his profile, where, I mean, he's only shooting 55% at the rim. He doesn't get all the way to the rim a ton, as we've talked about, with his lack of crazy handling and his tendency to settle. But his vertical is just kind of unimpressive, where there are a lot of plays like this where he just doesn't get very high, and bigger and stronger big men are very easily able to seal him off from the rim and force him into tough shots and make his life really difficult at the rim. And that's only going to get worse at the NBA level, where a lot of his shots are just early pickup, tough floaters. And while this stuff is working right now, obviously, because he's just a crazy shot maker at this level, I mean, the question is, how sustainable is this going to be? How much can he live off of this in the NBA? Because possessions, especially for rookies, don't always come often, especially if Brice, gets drafted to a team that's already pretty good. So is he going to have the agency and the license to just drive and chuck up floaters? And some of them will go in, and a lot of them probably won't early in his career if he's continued to be bothered by length and athleticism. And the passing just generally is a pretty significant weakness. There is an interesting list of guys. Like assist to turnover ratio is a pretty okay marker of decision-making craft. These are all the guys like sub 1 with really good shooting indicators, and there's a lot of good passers on the list. Like Cade obviously was super misleading. Ingram improved a ton in the league. Same with Jamal Murray and even Harrison Barnes and CJ McCollum. But Brice is way lower. He's at half an assist to turnover, which is basically below all of these guys, or almost all of the significant guys. So there is a lot of room for worry, even if plenty of players have made, poor decision making work in the league. I think like Buddy Hield is an interesting one, who has just never been a great passer and has kind of improved slightly as a decision maker over his career, but just always made it on his nutty shooting. And while Buddy was more about the threes, the same kind of concept, I think, arises where, especially on his drives, I think Brice just does not see the floor very well. He's prone to these kind of really bad, weird turnovers where it's just like unsure what the goal was. And I think this is part of like what happens when you settle for these bad shots and these kind of tough shots when like, Brice jumps from here and you realize like, oh crap, like I physically cannot get the ball over this guy. Whereas if he keeps his dribble alive, he can be more intentional and kind of make better decisions. But I do think the passing has improved a little bit as the season has gone on, which is always good to see. Like he's more than capable of making these simple like little baseline kicks or like attack closeout, make a kick. And there's some very simple like pick and roll stuff. Shout out to Scouting Rapport, by the way. I get lots of my clips from there, and you should go subscribe to the YouTube channel if you don't. He's done some like simple pick and roll stuff again, like two defenders stay. He notices the wide open paint, and he lobs it over top to his roller. Like that is the simple stuff that he really needs to build off. I don't think Brice is ever going to be a great passer, but I think it's certainly possible he gets to the point where he's like, good enough if he's really that elite of a scorer. And that's going to be the big question for Brice. And, I think how high you value him is going to come down to personal preference because, like, Brice is obviously going to be a great off-ball shooter. He's going to be a good spot-up three-point shooter, but he is at his best with the ball in his hands when he can eat up the shot clock, take up possessions, and hit tough shots. And that's just not going to work for everyone and for every NBA team, especially ones that already have ball-dominant stars. And it's a lot more difficult to develop into a great on-ball scorer if you just don't have the opportunity. I think the ceiling for Brice as an on-ball scorer is really, really high, just with the obvious shot-making goodness, and I think some of like the low-hanging fruit handling development, and some of the handling skill he already has could make for a really lethal shooter and scorer. So it's going to be really interesting where he goes. I lands like mid-teens, I think, with him, but I could see some people having him like top 10. I think that's honestly okay. I get it. And I get having him even lower as well because the defense and the feel are certainly concerning. But let me know what you think about Brice. Hope you enjoyed this video. He's very interesting, and I'm excited to watch him progress in his career and throughout the season.